today we're going to be doing a braised lamb shank with some root vegetables. Should be a really nice recipe. Lamb's looking good right now. First thing we need to do is you're going to need a nice quality pot. I've got one right here. And we have our lamb shanks. So I've got two of these right here. And I've just salted these and brought these to room temperature. Pulled them out about an hour ago, just a salt on the outside. And then what we're going to need here, make sure you have an extra plate. So we're going to brown these first, take them out, brown the vegetables, add them back in, then we're going to add liquids. We're going to let this simmer for about 2.5 hours. We're doing 2 lamb shanks, so nice dinner for 2, or if you could probably make this work for 3 as well. We've got some olive oil. That's going to, just enough to coat the bottom of the pot here. There's a fair amount of fat on these at the moment, so that's all going to render out. We don't want to add too much fat too early. So let's get some heat underneath that. We're at a pretty high heat. You might see a cat running at my feet. That would be Mischief. She just found a mouse. Fake mouse. Okay, so let's bring this up. We don't want it too hot, but we want enough so it's going to brown. We're going to brown these individually, one at a time. While that's coming up to heat, let's talk about some of our other ingredients. So we just have carrots. I happen to have baby carrots in the fridge. I don't have to cut them now, so that's nice. By all means, use any type of carrot you'd like. I have some fingerling potatoes, and I'm just going to leave these whole. We'll add those in, and they'll slowly simmer. This is going to be at barely a bubble, so it'll be plenty of time to cook those through. I've got an onion. Now the onion, we're going to end up peeling this, and we're just going to keep it in large pieces, because when we pull everything out, I'm not really going to pull out a lot of the onions. We're going to serve it with the carrots, and we're going to serve it with the potatoes. For our aromatics, we have some nice fresh rosemary, and some fresh thyme out of the garden. Salt, pepper, of course. I've just got some tomato sauce, right? Any one will be fine. You could also use like crushed tomatoes. I would use like a 10.5 ounce can, 14 ounce can. A little bit flexible there. We'll go through all the amounts as we go. And then a bottle of red wine. We're only going to use half of the bottle. This was a bottle that was just ever so slightly corked. Don't really want to drink it, but it's going to be great for cooking this down. It's a Petit Syrah. You could use a Cab. You could use a Merlot, Pinot Noir, kind of whatever wine that there's kind of lying around. But the key is the acid is going to break this down. Lamb shank is a very tough cut of meat, so we need to make sure that we cook it low and slow for a long period of time. My oil's hot. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Get my shank in there. Looks like we can kind of squeeze both of them in there at the same time. Let's get that starting to brown. What we're doing here is something called braising. We need to brown to lock in all the moisture, and then we're going to cover it with a flavorful liquid, and then we're going to simmer it real low for a long period of time. You do this with tough cuts of meat. A little more color on there. Make sure you don't stick. Now a fond is going to develop on the bottom of the pot. Those are your brown protein bits that get stuck on. Don't worry, that'll come off. I'll come off. We're adding tomato sauce, that's acidic, and then we're adding the wine, which is also acidic. Crank up the heat. Flipping these over. This is something we call Maillard reaction, the browning of protein. Really important when it comes to cooking meat. Alright, so as these are browning, we're going to start getting some of our other things ready to go. Like our onions. Set that aside. Sharpen my knife, it's a little dull. Get some of this peel off. We're going to add a whole onion to this. Okay, so just take the peel off. Keep an eye on what's happening here. What's nice about this recipe is you can have your mise en place almost ready to go. Cat's really rolling around in the background, isn't she? The shocker star of the show. Mischief? We're lucky we might even see mayhem in the distance. Who knew on the quarantine kitchen you'd also get, dinner and a show from the cat. In this house, pretty much happens every night. Alright, so all we're going to do is we're going to split these onions in half, in quarters. Right. Let me keep our pieces relatively large here. Again, in half, in quarters. Don't worry about the roots. And let's, you know what, let's cut them through. So we're talking roughly like 1.5-inch cubes when it comes down to it. It's looking good. So do your best. The lamb shanks are not going to want to evenly brown all the way around, but you're going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting to make sure that happens as much as possible. If we can get a nice color on it now, it's going to have a great color when it comes out. Between the red wine and the tomato sauce, it's going to be this dark, burgundy red when it's all done. Absolutely beautiful. Another ingredient that you're going to need to have, you could use water, but it's better to use stock. Any stock you have will work. You could use vegetable stock, preferably a lamb stock, if you have that. Most people don't. You could use beef. Want to be a mild beef stock, not too strong and pungent. Or you can use chicken stock. That will get the job done as well. And it's going to be enough to cover everything when we're done here. So we're talking a half bottle of wine. We've got about 1.5 cups of tomato sauce, and then just enough stock to cover. So depending on the size of your pot, that's going to be a variable amount. I would make sure you at least have 4 to 6 cups ready to rock and roll. The more times you make this recipe, the more you're going to know. Great sound effects coming off of here right now, which means it's time to turn them. This guy flipped over. And you can see down here in the bottom we have that nice foam developing. That's exactly what we want. This will be the last time we brown this, and then we're going to start sauteing all our vegetables and developing some color and depth of flavor before we're really going to simmer everything through. So those are going to be good. I'm going to lower my heat. There's a lot of fat in there still, so I don't have to add any more fat to the pot. Let's get a wooden spoon. Ready to go. So we're going to first go in with our onions. Get those moving around. Break everything up. And after 2.5 hours, an onion is not going to have a lot of body left to it. So just kind of keep that in mind. So you want a nice heavy bottom pot. This is a nice enamel coated pan. A cast iron Dutch oven is going to work well. Heat up. We're going to go in with our carrots. So we have 1 onion. This is about 2 cups of sliced carrot. So depending on if you could take whole carrots, again I'm using baby carrots because that's what I have lying around. Get those in there. Get all these onion scraps out of here. She's really stealing the show down here, isn't she? And so at this point we really want to crank up our heat. A little bit of browning on these vegetables would be desirable. A little salt and pepper. I'm going to hold back on the potatoes. I'm going to add those when I add everything else. I really don't need to get those browned or anything. Make sure you're using a pot that's going to be big enough to hold everything. Pretty much making enough for a dinner for 2 to 3. You could have a little bit leftovers. What's nice about all these leftover root vegetables is I can puree that and I can turn it into a soup for the next day. And we're going to be left with not a lot of flavorful liquid. We'll reduce some of that down to a nice sauce, but not quite everything. Okay. So, aromatics. Thyme. On the stem, we can pull the stem out later. And rosemary, again, on the stem. So we'll get all of that in there, nice and happy. Smelling really good. By starting to saute with those aromatics in there, it's going to really bring out the flavor a bit more. Onions are starting to take a little bit of color. A little extra stem, turn it up. Put that in there. So now we need to have our liquid ready to go. So again, we have some stock here. And we have our wine. If you didn't want to do wine in this, you could do all stock. You're just going to want to add a little more of tomato. And you're going to want to do a little bit more acid in it. So I'd use a little bit of red wine vinegar, probably about 1/4 cup or so. Really the pungency is going to work itself out with the long cooking on this. Don't go more than that, otherwise it's going to taste a little vinegary when you're done. Alright, tomato sauce is going to go in. What I want to do is I want to cook out almost all of that moisture in there. We want it to brown up a little bit, so it's going to go in red. We want to cook it down to more of like a maroon color almost. I'll brown it up just a little bit. Down the heat just a little bit. So again, it shouldn't look soupy at the bottom. Initially, you're going to have a lot of liquid. Just cook it all down. We'll have more left with a roasted tomato flavor. A bit of a splash here. Always keeping our kitchen nice and clean. Cook that down. So it's a lot of work initially, but then this kind of just sits, which is nice. I don't know about you guys, but you know, a dish like this, or I can take a relatively cheap cut like a shank. These 2 shanks cost about $8. And they're smaller, only cooking for 2. But if you wanted to do more, you're going to need a much bigger pot to really squeeze these in. This is probably about a 3/4 pot. Now there's a couple ways to do this. I could put this in the oven and I could roast it all off. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to be about 325 to 350 degrees for that amount of time. Keep it covered. Or you can just do it on the stovetop. I like to do it on the stovetop, so my oven's freed up to do other things, like the cinnamon bun recipe. Oh, look, there's another cat running by. Welcome to my life, cooking at home. Let this go just a little bit longer. Alright. Then again, I like to use these fingerling potatoes. I'm going to keep them whole. Some of these will break up a little bit. It'll also help kind of thicken up the sauce later on. But I can always take these out later and give them a rough chop into some smaller pieces. But since it's going to cook for so long, for 2.5 hours, I want to keep them as whole as possible, as long as possible. We'll add, it's kind of a to-taste thing. Per person, you want to add about 4 of the fingerling potatoes, unless they're really small. You might want to throw in an extra one there. Oh, there we go. When it starts to almost stick a little bit to the bottom, you know you're going to be ready to go. You should have a nice roasted tomato flavor off of this. You don't want a fancy tomato sauce, though. If you have one lying around, you can do that. A regular marinara, or again, a can of diced tomatoes, or crushed tomatoes would be just fine. If all you have is a can of tomato sauce, that'll work as well. What's nice about having something with a little more texture is that'll translate in our final dish. Okay. So, time to go back in with those lamb shanks. You really want to kind of nestle them in there, in between the vegetables, and we put some of those on top. Time for the wine. So, half a bottle of wine. A little bit more. This point is where I'm going to really lower my heats. Pretty much as low as it's going to go. I'm going to come in with my potatoes. Some of these are pretty big. You'll be able to really smell. Be careful when you're initially putting that wine that your face isn't over that, because that's going to kind of vaporize, and you don't want to inhale vaporized alcohol. Not a good idea. You will pass out into your pot, and then you have a whole other type of accident. So let's avoid that. Stock. And again, I just want enough to cover everything. Right what I need. I should be able to kind of nestle in some of these. As things cook, it's going to kind of reduce down a little bit, so just make sure everything is more or less submerged. Get that all in there. And then just keep it low. Lid on top. 2.5 hours is what we're looking for. It should be really fork tender at that point. So you should be able to just hit it with a fork or even two. If it's pulling apart, it's good to go. And that's about it. So when we're done, we'll kind of plate the whole thing up. We're going to use the potatoes. You could even take the potatoes out and make kind of like a mash out of it. Just be aware that the red wine is going to kind of permeate and turn everything kind of a red color. So you just want to be mindful of that. But otherwise, we'll come back to this in about 2 hours. And we're back, and it's 2.5 hours later. So what I did about 1.5 hours in was I pulled my potatoes and I kept them nice and warm. So we have our potatoes right here. We're going to make a mashed potato out of that. But first what we need to do is we need to pull out our lamb shanks. I'm going to kill our heat here. Get that out of the way. I'm going to pull these out and we're going to let them rest. They should be melting off of the bone at this point. Be really gentle with them. The bone will be fully exposed, meat will come to one end. We're just going to let those rest while we finish up with everything else. See the marrow coming out of the end here. It's going to make for a super flavorful liquid. Wrap that up with some foil, keep it nice and warm. And we'll come back to that when we plate everything up. What we want to do is we're going to use the carrots that are in there, but we want to take out some of that liquid. And we're going to reduce that down to a nice sauce. So if some carrots come along for the ride, so be it. But try to just bring this nice flavorful liquid with it. Got a couple carrots. Get rid of those. And a lot of this I can just use as a super flavorful liquid. I can freeze this and pull it out when I need it, which is quite nice. A little bit more. You're going to want roughly about a cup of liquid for every person that you're going to want to serve. We're going to crank this up to a nice high heat, and we are just going to reduce that down. Stay. So. It's pretty bold right now, but here's where we're going to want to adjust for any flavor. So we give it just a touch more pepper, a little more salt. Mix that in. And again, I'm just going to allow that to just reduce. All right, mashed potatoes. Good stuff. Everything nice and warm. You don't need a lot. I've got some heavy whipping cream. You could use milk as well. We have our potatoes and a fork. We're going to keep these pretty rustic. I'm just going to use my fork to kind of break things up a little bit. Kind of smashed potato. Some of the rosemaries come along for the ride here. I've got some little bits of onion. All of that is perfectly okay. We just want to make sure we're going to get things nice and creamy. But I don't mind the texture being kind of a little more rustic. Fingerling potatoes have a lot more starch in them. You can just use a fork. You can use a masher if you want. With such a small quantity, why get a really big masher all messy? So we're just going to press this, and then we're going to start adding some butter. A couple pieces. When I say a couple pieces, I mean a lot of pieces. For every couple potatoes, a couple tablespoons of butter. It's not necessarily a healthy dish. I'm gonna break this up in there. I like to do a butter heavy mashed potato. Makes it quite nice. And just start kind of mixing that in. You're gonna want to make sure you salt the potatoes relatively well. Come back a little bit more, a little pinch of pepper. Add a little bit of cream. I like most of the butter to melt first. There we go. A fat cap on there. Alright, we're reducing down with our sauce. Now it's going to seem at first, oh wow, you added way too much heavy cream. No. it's all going to get absorbed because there's so much starch in that potato. Really just start mixing it in there. And again, this is just a rustic smashed potato. What you end up with is almost a little more of an orange color to that potato, and that's really coming from that red wine that reduced down in that pot. Let's see how we're doing here. Keep going. You want to reduce that nice flavorful liquid by at least half, if not just a little bit more. We have our nice mashed potato here. You can hold this really warm just on the stove top if you wish. It's completely up to you. Let's get some of these things out of the way. See how we're doing on flavor here. Really great flavor. All right, let's start talking about our Play-Doh. Get this out of the way, bring a plate in. One of the best lamb shank I've ever had. I was in a pub in Dublin visiting a friend who was studying abroad. Got this dish, just melted in your mouth, just had root vegetables, similar to what we're doing here today. And it's a peasant dish. We're taking a really tough cut of meat and we're kind of like turning it into gold. So I like to do more of like a peasant style presentation. So we're going to come in with our mashed potatoes first. Nice big dollop here. Generous portion. This is also what we're going to lay the actual shank onto. So don't be shy. We're going to come in. We need something to get those carrots out with all the liquid, so good time to have a slotted spoon. Normally I wouldn't be working with so many plastic utensils, but at home, you make it work. Okay. So our shanks, let me just get this out of the way. So shanks are looking great. It's cool enough you can kind of pick it up by the bone. Pull off some of those onions that are on there. Put that right there on top. Then I'm going to come in with some carrots, sauce on top. Relatively simple. Now be careful, you might still have some stems lingering. I'll pull those to the side. So, simple presentation here. Our heat there. I'm just going to get a spoon so we can put our sauce on. This sauce is going to be relatively thin, more like a jus on top. There's so much fat in those mashed potatoes, you don't even need a sauce. Just spoon a little bit on top. And that is all you need. Alright, so we have a really simple dish. We have our lamb shank, mashed potatoes, some nice beautiful carrots there, and it's as easy as that. Don't try to overcomplicate food. Biggest thing with this one is you need acid, where you used wine, and that tomato sauce to really break down a lot of that connective tissue in the lamb, and just keep it low. I had my burner on the lowest setting. The flame was barely there, bubbles just breaking the surface. And then with the lamb, just make sure it's super tender when it comes off the heat. Generally, it'll take about 2.5 hours at that nice bit of a bubble. Just remember, don't overcook your veg. With the potatoes, if they're done, pull them early. You can always keep them warm in an oven, and then you'll be ready to go. But hopefully I'll see you guys making this. And until the next time, this is Quarantine Kitchen.